The blood-curdling scream pierced the stillness of the South Dakota night, ripping Grace Harrison from her sleep as she bolted upright, knowing instantly that something was terribly wrong. The window to her son's room stood open, curtains billowing in the cool spring breeze of 1876, and Samuel's bed was empty. "Samuel!" Grace cried, rushing to the window, her nightgown billowing around her legs as she leaned out into the darkness. The moonlight illuminated the yard behind her modest home on the outskirts of Lead, but there was no sign of her 5-year-old son. Only trampled grass and a single small boot lying abandoned told the horrific tale. Grace's hands trembled as she lit the oil lamp, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Samuel was all she had in the world since her husband Thomas had died in the mines last winter. The gold that had drawn so many to the Black Hills had taken her husband, and now it seemed it had taken her son too. By dawn, half the town had joined the search. Sheriff Barton organized men into groups, combing the surrounding hills and forests, but as the sun climbed higher, hope dwindled. It wasn't until mid-morning that the tracker found the evidence: men's boot prints, a partial horseshoe imprint, and signs of a small body being carried away. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison," Sheriff Barton said, removing his hat. "Looks like he's been taken." Could be those outlaws that hit the stage last week. Or, he hesitated, not wanting to voice the other possibility that Samuel had been taken by men who sold children to families back east or put them to work in places where questions weren't asked. Grace stood on her porch, her face pale but composed. "Then I'll find him," she said simply, turning to go back into the house. "Now, Mrs. Harrison," the sheriff called after her, "you can't just go riding off. These men are dangerous." "Let me send some wires, see what we can. Every minute counts, Sheriff," Grace interrupted. "I won't sit here waiting for your wires while my boy gets taken further away." Her green eyes flashed with determination. "I buried my husband, I won't bury my son." Inside, Grace changed into her riding clothes, the split skirt that had scandalized the town when she'd first worn it, but which allowed her to ride astride rather than side saddle. Thomas had taught her to shoot and ride during their first years of marriage, saying a woman alone in these parts needed to defend herself. She never imagined she'd need those skills to find her own child. As she packed supplies, a knock came at the door. When she opened it, a tall man stood on her porch. Dust covered his clothes and the badge on his chest caught the morning light. "Mrs. Harrison? I'm Deputy Marshal Isaac Jenkins. Sheriff Barton told me what happened." His voice was deep with a slight Texas drawl. "I've been tracking a gang that's been stealing children along the frontier. I think your son may have been taken by the same men." Grace studied him. Early 30s, she guessed, with eyes that had seen too much and a jaw set with determination. His dark hair fell in waves under his wide-brimmed hat, and a scar ran along his right cheekbone. "I'm going after him," she said firmly. Jenkins nodded slowly. "I figured you might, that's why I'm here. I'm offering to ride with you." When she looked suspicious, he continued. "These men are dangerous, Mrs. Harrison. I've been on their trail for months. You'll have a better chance with me than alone." "Why would you help me? Don't you have official duties?" "Finding these child stealers is my duty," he said grimly. "And I've learned that mothers are the most determined trackers when their children are involved." He paused. "I lost my sister's boy to men like these, never found him. I won't let that happen to your son." Grace considered him for a long moment before nodding. "We leave within the hour." "I hope you can keep up, Marshal Jenkins." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Isaac, and I reckon I'll manage." Within the hour they rode out of Lead, Grace on her chestnut mare, Penny, and Isaac on his tall black gelding. The townspeople watched them go, whispering among themselves about the widow riding off with the marshal. Some thought her foolish, others brave. None believed she would ever return with her son alive. The first few days were the hardest. The trail was still fresh, leading southwest through the Black Hills. They rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only when the light grew too dim to follow the tracks. Each night, Grace would fall into an exhausted sleep, only to wake crying out for Samuel. On the third night, as they camped beside a narrow creek, Grace stared into the fire, her hands clutching a small wooden horse, Samuel's favorite toy that she'd found beneath his bed. "He's afraid of the dark," she said suddenly. "Ever since he was 3, he wouldn't sleep without a candle lit." Her voice caught, "Wherever he is, he's scared." Isaac looked up from where he was cleaning his revolver. "Children are stronger than we give them credit for," he said quietly, "and we're gaining on them. They're moving slower with a child." "How can you be sure?" Grace asked. "They're not covering their tracks as well as they should, and they've been stopping earlier in the day." He reassembled his gun with practiced movements. "Tell me about your boy." A sad smile touched Grace's lips. "Samuel is bright, always asking questions. Why is the sky blue, Mama? Where does the sun go at night?" She traced the wooden horse with her fingertip. "He loves stories about knights and dragons, and he has his father's laugh big and loud like it's bursting out of him. He sounds like a fine boy." "He is." Grace's eyes hardened. "And I'll find him if I have to ride to the ends of the earth." Isaac studied her across the fire. In the flickering light, her copper hair gleamed like burnished metal, pulled back from a face that combined delicate features with a strength he rarely saw in women or men. "I believe you would, Mrs. Harrison." "Grace," she corrected. "If we're riding together, you might as well use my name." The next morning brought rain, turning the trail to mud and slowing their progress. By midday, they lost the tracks completely. Isaac circled wider and wider, searching for any sign of passage while Grace waited, her heart pounding with anxiety. "They might have headed for that line of hills," Isaac finally said, pointing west. "There's an old trading post about 20 miles that way. It's the kind of place where men who don't want to be found might stop." They rode hard through the rain, their slickers doing little to keep them dry. By the time they reached the trading post, little more than a ramshackle building with a lean-to-stable twilight was falling, and both riders and horses were exhausted. The owner, a grizzled man missing 3 fingers on his left hand, watched them suspiciously as they entered. Half a dozen men sat around the room, drinking and playing cards. All eyes turned to Grace, a woman in men's riding clothes, soaked to the skin and clearly not a working girl. "We're looking for some men traveling with a small boy," Isaac said, his hand resting casually near his holster. "They would have passed through in the last few days." The owner spat tobacco juice onto the floor. "Don't recall any boy. Lots of men come through. Don't ask questions. Maybe this will help your memory." Isaac placed a silver dollar on the counter. The man pocketed it without a second glance. "Still don't recall no boy." Grace stepped forward, pulling a small daguerreotype from inside her coat. "This is my son. He's 5 years old. Someone took him from his bed 4 nights ago." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were desperate. "Please, any information." One of the card players, a young man barely out of his teens, looked up. "Saw a kid that age," he said hesitantly. 2 days back, 3 men had him, said he was their nephew, taking him to his ma in Cheyenne after his pa died." The owner glared at the young man. "Shut your trap, Billy." Isaac moved faster than Grace could follow. Suddenly, the owner was pinned against the wall, Isaac's forearm across his throat. "What aren't you telling us?" "Nothing," the man wheezed. "Just don't like gossip, the boy," Grace said to Billy, ignoring the confrontation. "Did he have dark, curly hair? Was he wearing a blue nightshirt?" Billy nodded. "Hair like yours, madam. Don't recall his clothes, but he didn't seem happy. Wasn't crying or nothing, but he flinched when one of the men touched him." "Which way were they headed?" Isaac demanded, releasing the owner. "Said Cheyenne," Billy repeated, "but I heard one mention Fort Robinson after they thought I'd left." "Nebraska," Isaac muttered. "Makes sense. The railroad could take them east from there." They took a room for the night, the only one available, with Isaac sleeping on the floor while Grace took the narrow bed. Neither slept much, listening to the sounds of drinking and gambling below. "Why do men steal children?" Grace asked into the darkness. Isaac was quiet so long she thought he might be asleep. "Sometimes for ransom," he finally said, "but usually to sell. Orphanages back east don't ask too many questions if the price is right, neither do wealthy families who can't have children of their own. But Samuel isn't an orphan, he has me. To them, that doesn't matter. A child without a father is vulnerable, especially out here. Isaac's voice was bitter. My nephew was taken 3 years ago. My sister died of grief 6 months later. I'm sorry, Grace whispered. That's why I became a marshal, to stop men like these. In the faint moonlight through the dirty window, she could see him staring at the ceiling. We'll find your boy, Grace, I promise you that. And if we don't, the question that haunted her every waking moment slipped out before she could stop it. Then we keep looking, he said simply. For as long as it takes. They rode out at dawn, heading southeast toward Fort Robinson. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean. Under different circumstances, Grace might have appreciated the beauty of the rolling prairie stretched out before them, dotted with early summer wildflowers. Now, she only saw miles that separated her from Samuel. They made better time that day, pushing their horses harder than was wise. By nightfall, Grace's mare was limping slightly. We need to rest her, Isaac said, examining Penny's foreleg. There's a creek up ahead, we'll stop there. We can't stop, Grace protested. We're already 2 days behind them. And we'll fall further behind if your horse goes lame, Isaac countered. One night, we'll set out again at first light. Reluctantly, Grace agreed. While Isaac tended the horses, she gathered wood for a fire, her mind constantly on Samuel. Was he eating? Was he warm enough? Did he think she'd abandoned him? That night, sitting by the fire, Isaac told her about growing up in Texas, the son of a rancher who'd lost everything in the war. My father never recovered from it, he said. Started drinking, gambling, eventually rode off one day and never came back. I was 15. What did you do? Grace asked, wrapped in her blanket against the evening chill. What I had to. Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army. His expression darkened. Made some mistakes too, rode with the wrong men for a while, that's how I got this. He touched the scar on his face, a reminder to stay on the right side of the law, and now you uphold it. Isaac smiled faintly. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. He poked the fire with a stick. What about you? How did you end up in lead? Thomas, my husband, heard about the gold strike in '74. We were struggling to make ends meet in Minnesota, so we packed up everything and came west. Grace's expression softened at the memory. Samuel was just 3. He thought it was a grand adventure. Was it? For you, I mean. Grace considered the question. Parts of it were. I loved the mountains, the wildness of it all, but the mining town, it's no place for a woman alone. She stared into the flames. After Thomas died, there were men who thought I'd be available. When I made it clear I wasn't, some got ugly. Is that why you learned to ride and shoot? Thomas taught me before he died, said a woman should be able to protect herself and her child. A tear slipped down her cheek. But I couldn't protect Samuel, could I? Without thinking, Isaac reached across and took her hand. We'll find him, Grace. She didn't pull away. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. For the first time since Samuel was taken, she felt a flicker of hope. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. They would ride from dawn until dusk, stopping in small settlements to ask about 3 men traveling with a young boy. Sometimes they found people who remembered seeing such a group. Other times, the trail seemed to vanish completely, forcing them to make educated guesses about the kidnappers' route. They crossed into Nebraska, the terrain changing from mountains to rolling plains. The June heat beat down on them mercilessly, and water became scarcer. Yet they pushed on, driven by Grace's determination and Isaac's quiet competence. They learned more about each other during those long days. Grace told Isaac about growing up on a small farm in Wisconsin, how she dreamed of becoming a teacher before meeting Thomas at a county fair when she was 18. Isaac spoke of his brief time at university in St. Louis, cut short when the money ran out, and how he discovered he had a talent for tracking while working as an Army scout. I never thought I'd wear a badge, he admitted one evening. My father hated the law, blamed it for taking our land after the war. What changed your mind? I saw too many people suffering because there was no one to stand for them. Especially out here where a man with a gun can be the law if no one challenges him. He glanced at her. People like you and Samuel deserve better. When they reached Fort Robinson, they found the army post bustling with activity. Soldiers drilled in the parade ground, and wagons loaded with supplies trundled through the gates. After the isolation of the trail, the noise and movement were overwhelming. Isaac flashed his badge at the gate, and they were directed to the commander's office. Colonel James Parker, a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair, listened to their story with growing concern. "We've heard rumors of child stealers operating in the territory," he acknowledged. "Mostly targeting settlements without a strong military presence, but I haven't received reports of such men passing through here." "They might have avoided the fort," Isaac suggested. "Gone around to the north," the colonel nodded. "Possible." "The railroad station at Crawford is just a few miles east. If they were headed to the city, they might have caught the train there." Grace's heart sank. If Samuel had been put on a train, he could be halfway to Chicago by now. "I'll send a telegram to the station master," Colonel Parker offered. "Ask if he recalls such a group boarding. In the meantime, I insist you both stay here tonight. You look exhausted, madam." Grace wanted to protest, but the truth was she could barely stand. The constant riding, the anxiety, the hope repeatedly raised and dashed, it was taking its toll. That night, in the small guest quarters provided by the colonel, Grace finally broke down. The walls of the room seemed to close in on her, and the realization that Samuel might truly be lost to her forever crashed over her like a wave. Isaac found her sitting on the floor beside the narrow bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt. "I can't lose him," she whispered. "I can't." "You won't," Isaac murmured, stroking her hair. "I swear to you, Grace, we will find him." She pulled back slightly, looking up into his face. In that moment, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing during their weeks on the trail. Grace saw the same realization dawn in Isaac's eyes, followed immediately by guilt. He stood quickly, putting distance between them. "You should rest," he said, his voice rough. "I'll check if there's any word from the station master." After he left, Grace remained on the floor, her tears subsiding. What was happening to her? How could she feel anything beyond desperation to find her son? Yet there it was, a warmth in her chest whenever Isaac was near, a sense of safety in his presence that went beyond his role as her protector. Morning brought news the station master at Crawford remembered the men and boy. They had indeed boarded an eastbound train 3 days earlier. "Said the boy seemed drugged," reported the soldier who'd brought the telegram. "Barely awake." The men claimed he was sick with fever, heading to a doctor in Omaha. "Drugged to keep him quiet," Isaac said grimly. "It's a common tactic." They left Fort Robinson that afternoon, riding hard for Crawford. From there, they took the next train east, Isaac using his authority as a marshal to secure free passage. As the Nebraska landscape sped past the window, Grace tried to imagine Samuel on this same train, frightened and confused, wondering why his mother hadn't come for him. Why Omaha? She asked Isaac, who sat beside her, his hat on his knee. "If they're selling children, wouldn't they go further east? Omaha's a hub," Isaac explained. "From there, they could go in any direction: Chicago, St. Louis, even down the Mississippi to New Orleans. But my guess is they have a buyer already lined up, someone who specifically wanted a boy Samuel's age." The thought made Grace's blood run cold. Who would buy a child? Rich folks who can't have their own. Factory owners looking for cheap labor. Circus shows sometimes. Isaac's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter, we'll find him before any sale is made." Omaha sprawled along the Missouri River, a growing city of nearly 20,000 souls. After the open spaces of the trail, the crowded streets and tall buildings disoriented Grace. So many people, so much noise and smoke and movement. Samuel could be anywhere in this chaos. They found lodging in a modest hotel near the train station. Isaac went out immediately, showing Samuel's daguerreotype to station workers, hack drivers, and hotel clerks. Grace, exhausted from the train journey, reluctantly agreed to rest while he made inquiries. He returned late that night, his expression giving her hope even before he spoke. "A driver remembered them," he said. "Took them to a house on the north side of town. Said the boy was asleep in one man's arms, probably still drugged." Grace was already reaching for her coat. "Let's go now." Isaac shook his head. "It's too dangerous at night. We don't know how many men are in that house or if Samuel is still there. We need to observe first, make a plan." "Every minute counts," Grace argued, echoing her words to the sheriff back in lead. "And we won't help Samuel if we get ourselves killed rushing in." Isaac's voice was gentle but firm. "Dawn, Grace, we'll go at dawn." They left before sunrise, hiring a carriage to take them to the address. The house sat on a quiet street, larger than its neighbors, with a high fence surrounding the property. The curtains were drawn and no smoke rose from the chimney despite the cool morning. "Looks empty," Isaac murmured, watching from across the street, "but let's be cautious." They approached separately, Isaac from the front, Grace circling to the back. Through a window, Grace could see a kitchen, dishes still on the table. The back door was locked, but a window nearby had a broken latch. With a silent prayer, she pushed it open and climbed inside. The house was eerily quiet. Grace moved through the rooms, her heart pounding. A parlor, a study, a dining room, all showing signs of recent use but empty of people. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms. 2 were undisturbed, but the third had rumpled bedding and a small shirt thrown on the floor. Samuel's shirt. Grace sank to her knees, clutching the familiar blue fabric. He had been here, so close. But where was he now? She heard a floorboard creak and looked up to see Isaac in the doorway, his expression grim. "They're gone," he confirmed, "but not long ago. There's still coffee warm in the pot downstairs." "This is Samuel's," Grace said, holding up the shirt. "He was here, Isaac." "I know." He helped her to her feet. "And I found something else. Come downstairs." In the study, Isaac showed her a telegram he'd found half hidden under a book. "It mentions a delivery to be made at the river dock tonight, 9 o'clock. "Delivery," Grace repeated, her voice hollow. "My son is a delivery now." "It means he's still in Omaha," Isaac pointed out, "and we know where they'll be tonight." They spent the day preparing. Isaac visited the Marshal's office in Omaha, but found little support. The local lawmen were skeptical of his story and unwilling to commit men to what they saw as a doubtful rescue attempt. "We're on our own," he told Grace when he returned. "But maybe that's better. Less chance of spooking them." By 8 that evening, they were positioned near the docks, watching the river traffic from the shadows. The Missouri was busy even at night, with steamboats loading and unloading cargo. Men shouted to each other, lanterns swung in the darkness, and the smell of the river, muddy and rank, filled the air. "There," Isaac whispered at 8:45, pointing to 3 men approaching a small steamer tied at the farthest dock. One carried a bundle in his arms, a small blanket-wrapped form. "Samuel," Grace breathed, starting forward. Isaac caught her arm. "Wait, let's see who they're meeting." A 4th man emerged from the steamer, tall, expensively dressed, with a gold watch chain gleaming in the lantern light. He examined the bundle, pulling back the blanket to reveal Samuel's face, pale and still in the dim light. "Is he dead?" Grace gasped. "Drugged," Isaac reassured her. "Look, his chest is moving." The well-dressed man nodded, apparently satisfied, and reached into his coat. He handed something to one of the kidnappers' money. Grace assumed and reached to take Samuel. "Now," Isaac said, drawing his revolver. They emerged from the shadows together, Isaac's gun trained on the group, Grace a step behind with the shotgun he'd purchased that afternoon. "United States Marshal," Isaac called. "Step away from the boy." The reaction was immediate and violent. 2 of the kidnappers drew weapons, while the 3rd, still holding Samuel, back toward the steamer. The well-dressed man froze, his hands half raised. "Give me my son," Grace demanded, her voice carrying across the dock. What followed happened so quickly that later Grace would recall it only in fragments. One of the men fired. Isaac returned fire, dropping him. The second kidnapper charged toward them. Grace fired the shotgun, the recoil nearly knocking her down. The man staggered but kept coming until Isaac's second shot stopped him permanently. The third man, still holding Samuel, had reached the gangplank of the steamer. In desperation, he held a knife to the unconscious boy's throat. "Stay back or I'll cut him," he shouted. Grace felt ice in her veins. 20 yards separated her from her son, too far to rush him, too close to risk another shot with the unconscious Samuel in the way. "Let him go," Isaac said calmly, his gun unwavering. "There's nowhere to run." "Throw down your weapons," the man countered, "or I swear I'll kill him." The well-dressed buyer had disappeared, fleeing at the first gunshot. Now it was just the kidnapper, backed against the steamer, using Samuel as a shield. "Please," Grace said, lowering the shotgun. "He's just a little boy." "Take me instead." The man's eyes darted between Grace and Isaac, calculating his chances. "Both of you, weapons down, then back away." Isaac glanced at Grace, a question in his eyes. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Slowly, they both placed their weapons on the dock. "Now back up," the kidnapper ordered. "All the way to the warehouse." They complied, moving backward step by step. The man began to edge along the gangplank, still holding Samuel. He was nearly aboard when his foot slipped on the wet wood. For a crucial moment, the knife moved away from Samuel's throat. Isaac moved with lightning speed, drawing a second, smaller revolver from his boot. The shot echoed across the water, and the kidnapper fell backward, the knife clattering to the dock. Samuel tumbled from his arms, landing hard on the wooden planks. Grace was running before the echo of the gunshot faded. She fell to her knees beside Samuel, gathering his limp form into her arms. His face was so pale, his body so still. "Samuel," she sobbed, pressing her cheek to his. "Samuel, please wake up." Isaac knelt beside them, checking the boy's pulse. "He's alive, Grace, just heavily sedated." She couldn't stop the tears that flowed down her cheeks, soaking into Samuel's hair as she rocked him. "We found you," she whispered. "Mama found you." Within minutes, the gunshots had drawn attention. Dock workers and rivermen surrounded them, and soon after, the local law arrived. The marshal who had dismissed Isaac earlier was considerably more interested now, with 3 bodies on his dock and a kidnapped child recovered. They spent that night in a proper hospital, where a doctor confirmed that Samuel had been given laudanum to keep him quiet. "He'll sleep it off," the physician assured Grace. "Children are resilient. By morning, he should be more himself." Isaac arranged for a private room, and Grace refused to leave Samuel's bedside. As the night deepened, Isaac brought her coffee and sat beside her, watching the small boy breathe evenly in the hospital bed. "You saved him," Grace said quietly. "That shot, we saved him," Isaac corrected. "I wouldn't have found him without you." In the soft lamplight, she studied his profile, the strong jaw, the scar that spoke of past violence, the eyes that had shown her nothing but kindness and determination for the past month. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. He turned his palm up, interlacing their fingers. "What happens now?" she asked. "The local marshal will want statements. There'll be inquiries about the man who was buying Samuel, probably some wealthy citizen above suspicion." Isaac's expression hardened. "But I'll make sure justice is done." "I meant, after that, will you go back to chasing outlaws?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "I've been a lawman for 5 years, he finally said. "Sleeping under the stars, riding from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to build something." He looked down at their joined hands. "But lately I've been thinking that might not be enough anymore." Before Grace could respond, a small voice spoke from the bed. "Mama!" Samuel's eyes were open, confused but aware. Grace leapt to her feet, gathering him into her arms as fresh tears flowed. "I'm here, sweetheart, I'm here, you're safe now." "The bad men took me," Samuel said, his voice slurred with the remnants of the drug. "I called for you. I know, my love, and I came for you, I will always come for you." She pressed kisses to his forehead, his cheeks, his small hands. Samuel looked past her to Isaac, who stood watching with suspiciously bright eyes. "Who's that?" the boy asked. "That's Marshal Jenkins," Grace said. "Isaac, he helped me find you." Samuel studied Isaac with a child's direct gaze. "Thank you for bringing my mama to me." Isaac cleared his throat. "You have a brave mama, Samuel. She never stopped looking for you, not for a single day." The next week passed in a blur. Samuel recovered quickly, though he was quieter than before and would wake crying in the night. Grace never left his side, sleeping beside him in the hotel room Isaac had arranged. Isaac himself was busy with the investigation, working with the Omaha authorities to identify the well-dressed buyer. They discovered he was a prominent businessman from St. Louis, whose wife had recently given birth to a son after years of childlessness. The evidence suggested he had purchased at least 3 other children over the years. "He'll face justice," Isaac promised Grace when he visited them each evening. "All of them will." A telegram arrived from Sheriff Barton in Lead, expressing his amazement and joy at the news of Samuel's rescue. He reported that the town had taken up a collection for Grace, ensuring she would have funds to return home whenever she was ready. Home. The word felt strange to Grace now. After a month on the trail with Isaac, after everything they had survived together, the thought of returning to her empty house in Lead without him seemed impossible. On their last night in Omaha, with Samuel asleep in the hotel room, Grace and Isaac walked along the riverfront. The same river that had almost taken Samuel away would now carry them back toward home. They had booked passage on a steamer heading upriver the next morning. "I've been thinking," Isaac said as they paused to watch the moonlight on the water. "About what comes next." Grace's heart quickened. "And I've requested a transfer to the Dakota Territory." He turned to face her. "If that would be acceptable to you." "Acceptable?" A smile bloomed on her face. "Isaac Jenkins, are you following us home?" He took her hands in his. "I'm following my heart, Grace Harrison. It led me to you on the trail, and I don't intend to lose sight of it again." "What about your work as a marshal?" she asked softly. "The outlaws you need to catch." "There are outlaws enough in Dakota," he said with a wry smile. "And gold brings trouble wherever it's found." "Lead could use another lawman." His expression grew serious. "But more than that, I need you and Samuel. This month searching for him, it showed me what I've been missing all these years." "And what's that?" "A home," he said simply. "A family, someone to come back to at the end of the day." Grace stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "We need you too," she whispered. "Samuel talks about you constantly, and she took a deep breath. "I never thought I could feel this way again after Thomas. But you've shown me that my heart is bigger than I knew." Isaac's hands came up to cradle her face. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as Grace wrapped her arms around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I love you, Grace Harrison," Isaac murmured. "I think I have since that first day when you stood on your porch and told the sheriff you were going after your son with or without help." Grace laughed softly. "I was terrified, but I couldn't let Samuel down." "You never did," Isaac assured her. "And now you never have to face anything alone again, if you'll have me." "I'll have you," she whispered against his lips. "We both will." The journey back to Lead took nearly 3 weeks, but it was a different journey than the desperate chase that had taken them east. They traveled by steamboat as far as they could, then by stagecoach, and finally on horseback for the last stretch into the Black Hills. Samuel grew stronger each day, his natural resilience helping him overcome the trauma of his abduction. He formed an immediate bond with Isaac, peppering the patient man with questions about everything from how his revolver worked to why the stars stayed up in the sky. When they finally crested the last hill and saw Lead spread out below them, Grace felt a surge of emotion. The mining town looked exactly as it had when they left, yet everything had changed. She had left as a desperate mother, alone in her fear. She returned with her son and a man who loved them both. The town turned out to welcome them home. Sheriff Barton organized a celebration at the church hall, where Samuel was the center of attention, much to his delight. Grace watched her son accept a piece of cake from Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife who had always been kind to them, and felt a profound gratitude. "He seems to be adjusting well," Isaac commented, coming to stand beside her. "Children heal quickly," Grace said, "especially when they feel safe." She looked up at him. "The sheriff tells me you've been officially assigned here, Deputy Marshal for the Dakota Territory." Isaac smiled. "I start next week. The sheriff's even found me a small cabin to rent, just outside town. Or," Grace said carefully, "you could stay with us. Our house isn't large, but there's room enough." His eyebrows rose. "That would cause quite a scandal, Mrs. Harrison." "Then perhaps we should give them something better to talk about." She took his hand. "Marry me, Isaac. Not right away, Samuel and I both need time, but soon." Joy spread across his face. "Are you proposing to me, Grace Harrison?" "I believe I am." She smiled up at him. "Well, what's your answer, Marshal?" Instead of replying, he bent and kissed her, right there in the church hall with half the town watching. Someone whistled, and when they broke apart, Grace saw Samuel running toward them, his face sticky with cake and happiness. "Are you going to be my new pa?" He asked Isaac directly with a child's forthrightness. Isaac knelt down to the boy's level. "Would that be all right with you, Samuel?" Samuel considered this seriously. "Will you teach me to shoot a gun like yours?" "When you're older," Isaac promised. "Much older." "And will you stay with us forever and ever?" Isaac glanced up at Grace, his eyes full of love. "That's my plan." "Then it's all right with me," Samuel declared, throwing his arms around Isaac's neck. Grace watched as the man she loved embraced her son, and knew that the long, desperate journey had brought them exactly where they were meant to be. What had begun as a mother's determination to find her stolen child had become something more, a second chance at love, a new family forged in hardship and hope. 1 year later, Grace stood in the doorway of their home, watching Isaac teach Samuel how to saddle a pony, the boy's 6th birthday present. The summer sun gilded their dark heads as they worked, Samuel chattering away while Isaac patiently demonstrated the proper technique. Her hand rested on the slight swell of her belly, where their second child was just beginning to show. They had married in the spring, with Samuel proudly serving as best man. Now, with autumn approaching, their family would grow again. The nightmare of Samuel's abduction had faded, though it would never be forgotten. The men who stole him had paid for their crimes, and the wealthy buyer faced justice in a St. Louis courtroom. Isaac's testimony had been crucial in securing convictions, bringing a measure of closure not just for Grace and Samuel, but for other families whose children had been taken. Lead was growing, the gold mines attracting new residents daily. Isaac's position as deputy marshal kept him busy, but he was always home for supper, always there to tuck Samuel into bed and kiss Grace goodnight. "Mama, look," Samuel called, mounted proudly on his pony with Isaac holding the lead rope. "I'm a cowboy like Pa," Grace smiled and waved. "A fine cowboy indeed." Isaac led the pony over to where she stood. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his eyes warm with concern. "You should be resting." "I'm perfectly fine," she assured him. "Dr. Wilson says this pregnancy is progressing beautifully." She reached up to touch his cheek. "I wanted to watch my boys." Isaac captured her hand and kissed her palm. "Your boys were about to come find you. Samuel thinks we should have a picnic by the creek." "Can we, Mama?" Samuel pleaded. "Pa says there might be tadpoles," Grace laughed. "How can I resist tadpoles?" "Let me pack some food." As they set out an hour later, Samuel on his pony, Grace and Isaac sharing a horse since Grace had sold Penny after discovering she was with child, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A year ago, she had ridden out of Lead with nothing but determination and fear. Today, she rode with love and hope, surrounded by family. The trail they followed now was easy, winding through summer green hills toward the creek where they often spent Sunday afternoons. No desperate chase, no fading tracks to follow, just a family making memories. "Race you to the big oak," Samuel called suddenly, nudging his pony into a trot despite Isaac's instructions to wait. Isaac laughed, tightening his arm around Grace's waist as they followed at a more sedate pace. "That boy is fearless now," he commented. "Hard to believe what he went through." "He has you to thank for that," Grace said, leaning back against his chest. "You showed him what courage looks like." "He learned it from his mother," Isaac countered, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. At the creek, they spread a blanket beneath the oak tree. Samuel immediately removed his boots and waded into the shallow water, searching for tadpoles and interesting rocks. Grace and Isaac sat side by side, watching him. "Are you happy?" Isaac asked softly, his hand covering hers. Grace looked at her son, safe and laughing in the dappled sunlight. She thought of the child growing beneath her heart, the product of their love. And she looked at the man beside her, who had ridden with her through darkness and danger, never wavering in his commitment to find her stolen child. "Completely," she answered, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I have everything I need right here." Isaac smiled and wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close. "So do I," he murmured. "So do I." Together they watched Samuel splash in the creek, his childish delight a testament to resilience and healing. The sun warmed their faces, the future stretched bright before them, and the long search that had brought them together became another thread in the tapestry of their shared life, a family forged in determination, bound by love, and made stronger by the journey they had survived together.